guest in this segment is Seth DiStefano from the West Virginia Center for Budget and Policy. Seth, good morning, sir.
Good morning, Rob.
You are here with my co-hosts, Matt Miller and Johnny John Bodwell. I messed up his nickname
for a
Seth. Second.
Good morning, Matt.
Good morning.
How y'all doing?
Excellent, thank you.
Doing great, sir.
Read from your email, Seth. The budget resolution vote last week in Congress was highly significant. Massive cuts to Medicaid and SNAP, which this budget resolution aims to do, would be devastating to kids, seniors, and working families all over West Virginia, not to mention what it would do to the ability of hospitals, community health care clinics, and grocery stores to keep their doors open for everyone. Seth, talk to me about what you're seeing out of Washington, D.C., how it might trickle down to the state as well, and what your fears are.
So, amongst all of the news out there coming out of D.C., I would really hope that your listeners and people across West Virginia are paying special attention to Congress and the congressional budget process. This is really important, right? How the public tax dollars are spent or cut in this case. Last Tuesday, a week ago, the House of Representatives, including, unfortunately, Representative Riley Moore and Representative Carol Miller, voted in favor of a budget plan that would take health coverage and nutrition assistance away from millions of people across the country, including hundreds of thousands right here in West Virginia, all in the name of really just providing a big tax cut to the wealthiest 5% of households. Most of those folks don't live in West Virginia, I would add. We don't have a lot of people who are that wealthy in the state. And so these are, I think misguided priorities. Nobody really went out, so far as I could tell, a year ago, saying that, you send me to Congress or you do this, we're going to go, take nutrition assistance away from kids and seniors, or we're going to jeopardize the health care coverage of up to a third of West Virginians. And so as this process unfolds, it is our hope that our United States senators show better judgment, and that perhaps our members of the House of Representatives see, the error of their ways, if you will.
In West Virginia, my understanding is that about 80% of the state is on either Medicare, Medicaid, or the state's health insurance plan, PEIA. Seth, is that a statistic that you have found to be correct?
I would have to double back on that to check the 80% mark, to be 100% honest. I don't want to give you certainty when I don't have it off the top of my head. I can say that close to a third of West Virginians rely on Medicaid. As for Medicare, yes. We are an aging population, so I imagine that we do have a significant percentage of folks who rely on Medicare as well. And then, of course, the Public Employees Insurance Agency doesn't just cover state employees. There are multiple, like county and local, and retirees that rely on it as well.
Yes. So I've seen the statistic, over 500,000 West Virginians are on Medicaid. Explain how Medicaid works at the federal and state level, because it is a two-pronged approach there, and the reimbursement for Medicaid and hospitals and their participation in Medicaid.
So, Medicaid is a vitally important, initiative for West Virginia. And essentially for, to kind of boil it all down, Medicaid works on a series of federal matching dollars, right? So for every dollar that the state of West Virginia puts up for the general Medicaid fund, we receive about $3.50 back from the federal government in matching funds. For what is known as the expansion population for the under the Affordable Care Act, that match is even more generous. For every dollar we put up, we currently receive $9 from the federal government. This is important for a lot of reasons. I don't want to take away from the individual importance of Medicaid. Let's be clear, 40% of kids in Berkeley County alone receive their health care coverage through Medicaid. Very important to get checkups and the health care that they need. Also, those federal matching funds, when we talk in that context, are a contributing factor, a direct contributing factor that keep hospitals open for everybody. They keep community health care clinics open for everybody. So when we see actions out of Congress that deliberately target Medicaid for just unbelievably draconian cuts, this is what I really think listeners need to take stock of, right? It's bad enough to jeopardize the health care coverage of kids, of seniors who receive nursing home care through Medicaid, of working families. Maybe you're working, you're maybe not making a ton of money, but you're doing the best you can to get ahead. Cuts like this really are not in the best interest of West Virginia. In fact, they're very much against our interest, right? There are real consequences for cutting or otherwise setting up administrative roadblocks to these federal matching funds for communities as a whole.
And Seth, you mentioned about tax cuts for billionaires. Are you referring to the Trump tax cuts from his first administration, which are right now in the deadline phase of being extended at some point? You're specifically referring to the extension of the current tax rates that are in effect, correct?
That is correct. Yeah. So what is what appears to be the game plan as of right now, as of today, and we all know Congress likes to change their mind on a regular basis, is that the one big beautiful bill strategy that President Trump has expressed his admiration for to not only extend, but my understanding expand the original Trump tax cuts, which were undoubtedly favored and tilted towards the very wealthiest individuals and corporations in the country, and as a lack of a better term, to pay for those tax breaks for the wealthy and corporations. Roughly about $1.8 trillion in tax cuts. That's kind of what's on the table. What was voted on, at least the blueprint was voted on last week in the House of Representatives. Here is kind of a taste of what they're doing to pay for that, right? $230 billion cut in the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, right? That's food assistance for over 40 million people in Berkeley County. That's food assistance for 3,945 kids. A $330 billion cut to student loan affordability, affecting about 5 million people. That's a prescient issue in West Virginia. West Virginia access to higher education can be difficult just by higher levels of poverty, and we also have a kind of an outsized percentage of our folks who are in debt to receive education. And then again, an up to $880 billion cut to Medicaid, which provides health coverage to 72 million people across the country. And like we talked about, almost a third of West Virginians.
All right, let's go to Matt Miller first. Matty.
So, Seth, it sounds like if all of these things fall into place the way that you're talking about and these cuts do take place, that's going to put the pressure back onto the state of West Virginia. What are your thoughts and or even fears of how the West Virginia State Legislature might be able to handle these things?
That's a great question, Matt. Thank you for bringing it up. So I think part of the strategy from congressional Republicans in the House of Representatives, at least the leadership, if you will, is to try and push the responsibility for providing these services to the states, right? Well, we're going to otherwise, limit the federal match, or we're going to cut the federal match, we're going to outright cut the funds in general, or we're going to set up massive administrative roadblocks in order for, folks to receive federal food assistance or to receive health care coverage through Medicaid. If you've been paying attention to what's kind of happening within Charleston, West Virginia really doesn't have any extra money to kind of fill in these gaps. Most states don't. Some states do better than others, but West Virginia, whether we like it or not, for every dollar we put in to the federal tax system, we receive quite a bit more back, right? And so, ultimately, this deal is a net loser for the people of West Virginia. And I don't see any way. Right now, lawmakers, when I'm up at the Capitol, are just trying to figure out how to hold on to the small things that are important for their communities, right? The fairs and festival money, right? That means so much on the local level, or, something for the library communities. Governor Morrissey has pointed out that, in all fairness, he was very honest and upfront with this, and I would have to agree with him that our legislature previously passed tax cuts at the state level that just simply were not paid for. And we are looking down the barrel of significant budget shortfalls at the state level just based on that. The last thing our legislature needs to deal with is hundreds of millions of dollars pushed on us from the federal level that just simply isn't there. So what you're talking about is massive cuts, Matt. That's what that equates to.
At the same time, obviously, the federal government is going to have to make cuts as well when we look at the continuing deficit year by year and the staggering debt overall. Are you looking and just simply saying there are better places to make cuts than in these particular areas?
I mean, I think the whole idea of, we have to do something about the deficit to me, has always been kind of a straw man argument. I just talked about like the $1.8 trillion in tax cuts. that budget they voted on last Tuesday. Regrettably, Congressman Riley Moore and Congresswoman Carol Miller voted in favor of that. But they're only proposing about $1.4 trillion in cuts. And I think it was Thomas Massey from Kentucky, who was the lone Republican House member that voted no, came out and said out loud what a lot of other people had been saying privately within the Republican caucus, which was this only adds to the deficit problem. We're not actually doing anything about the deficit. And so really, when you look at this budget, it has nothing to do with the federal debt. All they're really trying to do is come up with enough money to try and pay for as much of these tax breaks that are tilted to the very wealthy at the expense of low and middle income families, ability to have health coverage, ability to put food on the table, keep their food bills down through things like universal school meals, which West Virginia leads the country in, and their ability just in general to attain a college education and kind of move up the economic ladder.
Jonathan Bodwell.
Well, Seth, I mean, I agree with you.
Whoa, stop the show.
Hold on. I agree with you on part of that is what I was going to say. No, I mean, I believe a society needs to take care of children, needs to take care of the elderly. But I think one of the biggest problems we have in general is we take care of a lot of people who are perfectly capable of working and choose not to. I mean, my feeling is if you are an adult and you are physically and mentally capable of working and you don't, you really don't deserve to eat, really. I mean, you don't deserve you don't deserve my work, Matt's work, your work, Seth, our tax dollars to pay for the lazy. And this will affect, unfortunately, will affect children and the elderly and people who need it, people who deserve help. Hopefully, it'll all get figured out. Where do you think they should be cutting money? How do you feel like the budget? I mean, you are a budget policy expert. Where do you think our budget cuts should come from?
Well, I mean, I think when it comes to the decisions around policy as to how to allocate both federal, state, local dollars, we'll focus on federal for purposes of this conversation. I like to harken back to, I believe it is, if I'm not mistaken, the Gospel of Matthew, right? For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also, right? Your budget is a statement of your values, right? Don't tell me what your values are. Show me your budget, and I'll tell you what your values are. I could take up the whole 1 or 2 hours of this show having a debate on kind of where the excesses of federal spending are. I can assure you this much. It ain't federal food assistance, right? It isn't the less than $6 a day that the SNAP recipient in West Virginia receives to put food on the table, right?
I'm sorry, Seth, I didn't mean to cut you off. I'm more looking at the state level because we have we have very little control over the federal. Say the federal government makes these draconian cuts. How does our state feed these kids and make sure Medicaid stays viable?
Well, let's put that in perspective too, because the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, food stamps, as it's been referred to, the benefits there are 100% federal, right? So none of your state tax dollars really go to support that. That's all federal money.
Right.
The overwhelming amount of dollars that are used to support health care coverage for up to a third of West Virginians. I think last time I checked, it was close to 250,000 kids through Medicaid. That comes largely from federal matching funds. Yes, West Virginia does put up some money, but we receive an extraordinary amount. This is very good for us, by the way, right? I'm 100% supportive of this from the federal government to draw that down. To your bigger question as to, where do we find efficiencies or things like that within the state budget, here's what I would ask you to put in perspective. I believe it's for the last 5 years of Governor Justice's two-term, stint as governor. West Virginia operated on flat budgets, right? And I think I've been on this show and talked about it before. A flat state budget is basically when Charleston tells executive agencies, hey, you can't spend 1 penny more this fiscal year than you did the previous fiscal year. Flat budgets don't work in perpetuity because they don't factor in basic inflation, right? The candy bar that costs $1 this year, next year is going to cost $1.02 or $1.03, right? That's just natural
And
inflation.
we had ridiculous inflation under the Biden administration. So we have to factor that in.
Yeah, and so when you look at Charleston and budgets being held flat for 5 years, executive agencies with very important work to do are already strangled to the point and cut down to the bone to where we have difficulty providing basic services through the Department of Highways or the Department of Human Services and Child Welfare, and we have a hard time holding on to state employees that do valuable work. All of these things are only made worse with a potential federal budget that in part aims to push the responsibility that the federal government is currently handling with several aspects of SNAP and Medicaid, and tries to push it onto the state with no money to fill the gap, if that makes sense.
Well, it does there. And then, I mean, we are a poor state, but there are so many states, California for one, that are in so much more fiscal trouble than we are because we have been responsible by having a flatline budget. I mean, there are states, what California is $40-50 billion. I think I heard on the news their budget has a deficit of $40-50 billion this coming year. I mean, we've done a good job of being fiscally responsible for our state. My question is, if the federal government, where we get a lot of this Medicaid, and I understand that SNAP is a federal program, but what happens if that gets dialed back? Where does our state find the money to keep feeding these kids?
We don't. Period. I mean, that's it. That we just those kids, end up losing food. Those families end up losing access to food assistance. Those seniors in nursing homes that are currently paid for by Medicaid potentially lose their coverage. In addition to up to a third of West Virginians who rely on that. Right. The money simply isn't there. Right. Yeah. And I think members of Congress understand this. Right. This piece of the federal budget really is a sleight of hand. It's like, we're going to pass this along to you, knowing full well you have no ability to make up the difference.
It's quite a dilemma, isn't it? Right? I mean, you're running $1.9 trillion deficits at the federal government level, and we are seeing that the interest on the debt is unsustainable. So you got to cut stuff. But the Trump administration also wants to extend their tax cuts, which negate a chunk, if not all, of the cuts. So you're still kind of back to zero. In the meantime, what do you do with hungry children? We can say it's the parents' or the grandparents' responsibility to feed them, but if you've got a giant opioid crisis in your state, they're already failing in doing that. So what do? We just throw the kids on the street and tell them to find crumbs in the dumpster? What's the answer? I
mean, that's it. The parents whose kids are on Medicaid, the parents whose kids are getting fed not through the efforts of the parents' work, it's not like they're going to change.
No. So what do you do?
It's sad.
I would push back on that, right? I mean, what I would tell you is that, let's just take Medicaid, for example. Most people who receive Medicaid coverage throughout the country and in West Virginia who can work or go to school do, right? It's just, we have a state that has a lack of good paying jobs. A lot of these folks are working at the local sheets or, another service industry job and just aren't making a ton of money. People who receive Medicaid who aren't working, generally speaking, a lot of them are disabled or are taking care of a family member at home and just not getting paid at all for it. And so this idea that, some people deserve support and other people, I think it just misses the mark of what Congress is trying to do.
That's a fair point.
We would all do well by focusing a little bit more on, it is not okay to jeopardize, school meals for kids throughout West Virginia or just basic federal food assistance or medical care solely so a handful of billionaires can reap an enormous windfall that West Virginia isn't going to see any benefit at all from, right? Just to reiterate, we don't have any billionaires in West Virginia. We barely have really any millionaires for that matter. This budget that is in motion at this point in time seeks to serve that small part of the population at the expense of the vast majority of West Virginia households.
Seth, on that note, we are out of time. I thank you kindly for yours, sir.
Thank you all. I am going to go enjoy some donuts myself.
All right.
Darn it. I want a donut.
I'm a big fan of the Hostess donuts, the crunch ones.
Oh, those are tasty.
Those are darn good.
Have a good day, sir.
See you all later.